Sorry, everyone. We'll be with you in a sec. I don't think this is doing anything.
Yes, you can go. Sorry.
Cool. Do you want me to start over or?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'll just give a quick intro again. Sorry, everyone, for the little technical hitch. So yeah, my name's Liesl. I do business development at ChainSafe, and I'm going to talk a little bit about ChainBridge and what it means to do business in a multi-chain world and what this interoperability is going to do for the space. So just a quick overview. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about ChainSafe, what we're working on, our principles, and how we do business. Then tell you a little bit about ChainBridge and what the roadmap is for that. And then the consequences of what this new version of ChainBridge is going to do for the ecosystem, and what decentralized bridging really means and will do. So a little bit about ChainSafe. We're a Toronto-based blockchain development R&D company, but we're pretty much fully remote. I myself am based in Berlin, and we're working on building all kinds of infrastructure for the Web3 space. We are blockchain and technology agnostic, so essentially we just look at projects, measure them by the value that we think that they can add to the ecosystem, and we work on whatever we think is cool, pretty much. This is what's really core to our ethos, and what attracted me to the team is that there's a really strong focus on the core principles. So we work on a lot of open source code, and this really meshes with our values of openness and collaboration and freedom, and that's something that we've brought to ChainBridge as well. A little bit about what kind of stuff we do. So we offer all kinds of research and development services for projects in the Web3 ecosystem. We're working with companies in the space all the way from like Web3 Foundation, EF, to Chainlink, and then a lot of smaller companies as well that we work with, so all across the span. And aside from development services, we also work on a few products ourselves. So we're working on a few things for other teams in the ecosystem. So we're building Lodestar, which is an ETH2 beacon chain implementation in TypeScript. Gossamer, which is a Polkadot host implementation. Forest is a Rust implementation for Filecoin. We're also building a Rust implementation for the Mina Foundation. So those are some of our internal, sort of external products. And then internally now, we're also working on a few things. So ChainSafe Files is an IPFS and Filecoin pinning service that has launched and should be coming to you all very soon. We're also working on a gaming SDK that connects Web3 with the Unity engine so that you can bring tokens and NFTs into games, especially like lots of mobile games that use Unity. And finally, what I'm going to focus on today is ChainBridge, which some of you may have heard of. It's a multi-chain, multi-directional bridge. So a little bit about what ChainBridge is. Essentially, it's a modular, multi-directional blockchain bridge that allows data and value to transfer currently between EVM-compatible chains, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to, or definitely we'll be able to integrate non-EVM chains. So at its core, what it really is a message passing protocol where events on a source chain are used to send a message that is then routed via a relayer network to a destination chain. And what we've gone into in building this is really focusing, once again, like I said, on our core principles. So we built ChainBridge in this image, and we've got a quote here from our amazing CEO, Aidan, that goes into the fact that rather than seeing this as a zero-sum game, we want bridging infrastructure to exist for everyone and to improve the ecosystem at large. So everything that we're looking at is, it's not just altruistic. It should always obviously be able to support economic principles, but we really want the ecosystem as a whole to be like as open as possible. A little bit about how it works. So essentially, when a user wants to transfer a token across from one chain to another, they will transfer that token to the ChainBridge contract, and then that will emit a deposit event that relayers are listening for. Then those relayers will one of the relayers will pick up a transaction and create a proposal on the target or destination chain. That then gets submitted for approval, and all the other relayers will vote on that. And finally, once a certain threshold is met, then the proposal passes and the transaction gets executed on the destination chain. So what would happen there is that a token would then be minted that's equivalent to the one that was locked up on the origin chain. Or in the other direction, that token would be burned, and then the one on the origin chain would be unlocked. I hope that makes sense. Anyone can jump in with questions at any time. What we're looking at right now is that there are a few challenges in the current design that we've got released. So we're working on improving a few things, but right now the biggest challenges are, first of all, that it relies on trusted relayers. So every bridge that gets set up has to sort of find and manage their own relayers, which is something that we've been helping our partners do. But it requires a certain amount of overhead, and it's one of the areas where we can improve on trustlessness and decentralization. It makes it a little bit more difficult to scale the ecosystem and to deploy as many bridges as are needed. The relayer sets, because of this, are also often quite small and have admin permissions, which means that we're not at a stage yet where we're fully happy with how secure users' funds are, and we'd like it to be a lot more trustless and more decentralized. Another consequence of this is that relayers have to essentially be trusted parties, and we have to trust them to behave honestly. There are some incentives in place to prevent them from acting maliciously, but currently there's no financial incentive, which, as we've seen in the Web3 design space, is one of the biggest ways to make people behave as you want. So we're working on that. A second challenge is that right now there are isolated instances of the bridge. So each bridge is mostly standalone, requiring, like I said, its own relayer set. And if you want to be able to bridge between multiple chains through one set of smart contracts, then this relies on the admins of that bridge essentially adding that functionality. So we want anyone to be able to deploy a bridge between any two chains, and if a bridge is currently deployed between that one and another one, then it will provide instant compatibility between all of them. One other challenge is that it currently requires permissions from the relayers to add tokens. So what essentially happens is if I'm transferring a token from chain A to chain B, then that token contract, whether it's ERC20 or 721, needs to exist on the destination chain to preserve the logic and the functionality of whatever that token is. So these all have to currently be approved, and the contracts have to be deployed on the destination chain by the relayers. So right now what we want to do is figure out a way to get all of those contracts deployed and preserve functionality for these tokens while they move across chains. Where we are headed. So I've talked a little bit so far as I've been going through the challenges in terms of what we want to do to improve the bridge. The biggest one being getting a trustless relayer set. So in the future we see there being a single relayer set that supports all bridges between all of the chains that we support, which will be many by, hopefully, in a short amount of time. So essentially there'll be a greater focus on streamlining transfers between as many chains as possible so that all these bridges don't have to be built one-to-one every time. And we think this trustlessness is really important, as obviously most people would in the blockchain space, because it involves people's finances, and users are exposing themselves to risks every time they use an application like this. They're locking up money in a smart contract that they need to be able to trust. So when they trust this system that will protect their funds, they essentially need it to be as trustless as possible so that they don't get rugged, essentially. So the way we're thinking of trustlessness in this context is a system where the end user doesn't necessarily need to trust any single participant or any group of participants in the network, because the economics and the cryptography and the network as a whole will make sure that their funds are secure. And the new designs that we're working on for ChainBridge will essentially make this a reality very soon. The next thing that we want to look at doing is making it easier to integrate future chains. Basically, each newly integrated chain should always be able to interact with all of the existing chains in the ecosystem, and through this single relayer set, we want to make it so that anyone can just spin up a bridge as easily as possible and plug in directly without having that friction of having to set up their own system. And finally, again, this is all kind of connected, but having modular security. So obviously the single relayer set will allow people to opt into like a much more secure pool, but we're also looking at a bunch of different ways to make the network more secure and protect it against attacks. The decentralized relayer network specifically should protect against malicious relayers, which is currently not something that is as protected as it could be in future designs. And also people spinning up bridges with malicious intent and adding their own malicious relayers in there. So hopefully with the new design, we should be able to prevent people from creating bridges that are designed essentially to scam. Cool, so then what does all of this mean? What does a decentralized chain bridge mean for the ecosystem? I think it's important to touch on what interoperability really means in the ecosystem and why it's so important. So you'll be seeing in the schedule right now that a large proportion of the talks this year are about interoperability and about bridging. And I think that's because creating a secure cross-chain bridge is one of the most important milestones in the industry right now. It's something that almost everyone is looking into, or if they're not looking into building it themselves, then they're looking at how to get somebody to help them with it. And interoperability is this problem that kind of touches on a whole lot of different parts of the space. It touches on scalability, it touches on UX, custodianship. All of these things that cross-chain bridging involves really come down to core solutions in the space that will be helpful, not just for the end user, but also for a lot of infrastructure to be built. So some of the consequences that we see of being able to deploy something like this, first of all, as I've just touched on, is scaling. So obviously, we all know what the difficulties can be in having a few chains that attract all of the interest in the space. It means that scalability is poor, costs are high, transaction costs are way over what somebody should be expecting to be paying. So if we can see all of these different chains, rather than scaling on a layer 1 basis, being able to all feed into part of a larger ecosystem by being able to bridge between all of these chains, then the ecosystem as a whole can scale, even if layer 1s aren't necessarily scaling at that same pace. Another important thing will be having blockchain state available on lots of different chains. This is, for example, something that you can see being important in layer 2s like Optimism. So interoperability being about more than just token transfers means that other kinds of assets, whether they're NFTs, governance rights, loan contracts, will all need to be transferred between chains. But also, there'll need to be asset agnostic transfers that essentially, preserve functionality and allow you to transfer state rather than just transferring assets. So the new version of ChainBridge that we're building will eventually be able to support cross-chain transfers of state, with a goal to eventually supporting cross-chain applications that can just easily run between a bunch of different chains. Another thing, sort of again touched on this already, being cross-functional bridges. So right now we're seeing a lot of people deploying bridges specifically for their individual use cases. And what we want to be able to do is have bridges that get deployed, have excellent security, have trusted reputations, have been audited, that everybody can come and jump on and use without necessarily having to spin up their own bridge just for their single application. So the new designs that we're making for ChainBridge will be able to support this ecosystem where anyone can essentially come and piggyback on infrastructure that's already been built rather than having to work on it on their own. And yeah, this will essentially make costs lower for everybody, make like implementation and development and deployment, maintenance costs, all of that much lower, and essentially just increase sustainability and interoperability. Final thing, I don't know if any of you have seen, but lots of cross-chain solutions these days are being hacked. I think Thorchain, AnySwap, a couple of other ones have suffered some pretty bad attacks in the past few weeks. So what we're trying to do with ChainBridge is also make it as absolutely secure as possible and prevent these kind of attacks from happening. Having an ecosystem of a lot of different chains and bridges is also really important for being able to sort of spread the attack surface, but also within ChainBridge, we're going to make sure that all of the contracts are heavily audited, and there's going to be incentives in the ecosystem through our decentralized relay network and also just through our own grassroots efforts to make sure that it's as secure as possible, that it's been audited properly, and that funds continue to be put towards maintaining security. Obviously, having this decentralized model that I've talked about will also prevent against attacks that come from there being centralization. So I've touched on a few of those, but yeah, essentially the security will make this interoperability in the ecosystem even better. And ultimately, I think that there being trust and interoperability in the ecosystem gives people more room and more time and more resources and energy to be able to focus not on bridging themselves, but to be able to focus on building cross-chain applications, on building things that move across a whole lot of different chains and make the most of all the different chains that we have in the ecosystem, and just generally increase innovation overall in the space. So hopefully with what we're building, we'll be able to, bring everyone closer to that multi-chain future. That's me. Quickly, if you want to learn more, go to the URL. But questions?
Yes. I don't know if you covered this, so if you did, I apologize for the redundancy. But how do you incentivize the relayers so that you ultimately get towards that more secure set of single relayers that you're talking about?
Yeah, so currently we're still like in a research phase and figuring out exactly what the relayer incentives will be. We're learning from a lot of mistakes that have been made. Well, I shouldn't say mistakes, but learning experiences that have been made in the past by other projects and by ourselves. And we're trying to figure out, like right now, whether or not there needs to be a token for that or how we do that. But essentially having some financial stake that the relayers have to put up will be one of the predominant ways. Sorry, I can't answer more like right now, but we'll be releasing information on it soon, so there should be a clearer answer then. Any other questions?
Thanks. You mentioned that you think it's beneficial to have like many different chains to spread the risk, kind of. I'm wondering if there are many different bridges, they will, I guess, all mint their own type of token, their own representation on the target chain. Isn't that a bit of a problem that you also then have like many different tokens then that actually represent the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, the way that this one, or that our bridge works specifically, is that you will have, I think I'm getting at what you mean here, where like the tokens will be locked up in order to be minted on a new chain. So it's not like you're duplicating value in the ecosystem. You're just moving it from one place to another.
Yes, but what I mean, if you have multiple different bridges, then you will have like ETH A and ETH B and ETH C on the target chain, kind of. Because you have bridge A and bridge B and bridge C, and these will be technically different tokens. So.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean, our goal is to create incentives that mean that people don't deploy a lot of different bridges all to the same chain. So what we're aiming to do is create an ecosystem where there is preferably like one or two or maybe only a handful of bridges to any given chain or from any given chain, and that rather than deploying the smart contracts for ChainBridge over and over again on one chain, that those will all just be used like as a singular one. Obviously we can't prevent anyone from just deploying their own instance, but the incentives that we're building mean that that won't really make a lot of sense.
Okay, thanks.
Do you support limitations in tokens? So for example, if I have a token that is whitelisted and I keep the whitelist or somehow managed so that I can force transfer from this token, do you also support such a functionality, and how do you support it on different bridges if I try to bridge such a token?
So
like
are you saying
realty token, for
if you
example.
try to bridge like a blacklisted token?
Or what? Yeah.
So under the current implementation, essentially the relayers on any given bridge get to decide which tokens can be transferred, because they have to deploy the token contracts to the destination and like origin chain, depending on where the token is bridging from. So at this stage, it's at the relayer level. But as we decentralize, it'll essentially still be at the relayer level, but they will be able to vote on which token contracts get deployed.
But do you support, like, for example, if I keep a whitelist for my token on mainnet and I bridge it somewhere else, then I have to sync the whitelist as well. Do you support such thing or not?
Yeah, so we support arbitrary message transfers essentially. So like any data that's associated with a token can be transferred alongside it.
Okay, thank you.
We've got one more there.
Yeah. Hey. I'm curious if you could just like talk more about security in general with, with this bridge solution, and like especially like, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on how to reconcile like open source values when developing like this solution that like obviously can make people more vulnerable to hacks, and it's happening a lot in this space. Yeah. It's not a like clear question. I just want to know if you have more thoughts on that to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the open sourcing in general, you know, there's always like the risk that someone will take what you've built and use it maliciously. I mean, one of the things I find myself having to explain weirdly often is that open source doesn't mean open license. So people can technically use the code and do malicious stuff with it, but they're not necessarily allowed to. You know, whether you're going to chase them up for that sort of depends on how egregious what they're doing is. But yeah, you know, it's not like open source gives everybody full freedom to do whatever terrible things they want with it. I mean, in terms of security, like on the bridge more specifically, I think, yeah, right now, you know, the contracts that we have on chain like are audited and as sort of as secure as one can reasonably be in, you know, in the blockchain space in general. I think where the real security benefits will come from is in improving the decentralization on the relayer layer. So yeah, on the blockchains, like you kind of have a like a baseline level of security guarantees just because of the like economics of how they're designed. But it's up to us as a team to figure out like what the protocol level economics and like incentives and security looks like on the relayer level, because that's really where we're doing like, yeah, most of the innovation. But yeah, TBC.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how like the fees would work for bridging from one chain to another. Like, would you be paying let's say I'm bridging from ETH to Polkadot, would I be paying the ETH fees and then the relayers are in charge of the DOT fees, or like how does that work essentially?
Yeah, so currently right now you obviously have to pay a gas fee in order to, like say if you're transferring something from Ethereum, you have to pay a gas fee in order to deposit your tokens into the ChainBridge contract where they get locked. At this stage, the relayers will take a fee that is decided by them in advance. So across different chains, it differs. I mean, different bridges, sorry. But yeah, at this stage, those fees are fixed by the relayers, and they're taken essentially in whatever they choose. So right now, like I'll give Ethereum Avalanche as an example. The relayers will take ETH if you're transferring from Ethereum to Avalanche, or take AVAX if you're transferring back the other way. But once we have a decentralized model, it's essentially like, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of innovation as to how you do fees. So yeah, it could just be like the easiest situation to have like a portion of what you're sending, of what you're bridging gets like taken by the relayers. Yeah, there's no concrete decisions yet on how that's done, but that's also something that governance on the relay level will be able to decide.
Cool.
I'm just conscious of time here. I don't know when the next person is, so. Okay, I'll leave you to it then. Cheers, everyone.